Do you enjoy writing your own stories and designing your own campaigns? Maybe you just like exploring your character's background and world building. Do you want to develop your writing skills, but can't afford the time or money for a creative writing college program? Then the Adventure Writing Academy is just what you need. AWA is an online, Skype-based school co-developed by Fantasy Flight Games writer Keith Ryan Capel, a creative writing program that makes RPG writing a point of emphasis. In addition to a nerd-friendly curriculum, classes are joined by a rotating cast of guest students, each one a working professional in the field, there to help provide the guidance students receive. Last year, AWA featured familiar FFG names like Katrina Ostrander, Tim Cox, and Jason Marker, and RPG industry regulars like Ray Valise and Eric Cagle. And the final class session is a 4-hour lecture on the business of RPG writing, game theory, and design by the creator of the narrative dice system himself, industry superstar Jay Little. Improve your writing, collaborate, make connections, learn and grow in a friendly atmosphere of fellow nerds. Interested? Learn more and enroll today at www.adventurewritingacademy.com.
Correctly with the correct amount.
D20 Radio, where gamers roll.
www.d20radio.com.
Hello, Gamer Nation, and welcome to the Dice School podcast, covering everything that you've ever wanted to know about how to run and play in the GeneSys Role Playing Game by Fantasy Flight Games. I'm your host, GM Hooly, and this episode we've got a lot to discuss. But before we get on to that, let me introduce you to the people who know not to go too far back into my Twitter account, my hosts and friends, GM Huzz and GM Flano. -1. We are without Caitlin. How are we, boys?
Good. Well.
Oh, not too bad, you know.
But we do have someone else here.
We do. We do.
-1 plus 1.
We have a special guest who joins us for the second time on the show. This time coming to us from the heart of Europe. Host of the Order 66 podcast, GM Chris. Welcome back to the show, Chris.
What is up, Gamer Nation? It's me, a GMC.
Crazy man.
I'm really tired.
But what time is it there? Because it's like, what, 7 o'clock here?
You really shouldn't be tired when you think about the time. Like,
Because it's like
Shut
morning.
8 hours rest
Shut up.
beforehand. Yeah.
Shut up. It is currently 11:44 a.m. in Austria, where I currently am. But I kind of played GeneSys from 1 a.m. to 7:30 a.m. this morning. So
Grief.
It's not a smart move.
I'm tired.
I'd still do it.
Yeah.
And how was your experience doing that, Chris?
Well, we had an absolute blast, but it was a beta test. It's so close to being complete, and it will be complete. My theme that will be available for the forthcoming Kickstarter for Gamer Nation Con 6 is Aegis, which is my Green Lantern inspired cosmic superhero setting. Yes, it's powers, but it's still magic. So I've still got magic on the brain, and yeah, it went extremely well. Everyone had a lot of fun.
Very good. And as I mentioned before, we're without Caitlin. We had everything planned. She was going to be staying up until stupid o'clock in the morning to record with us. But her and her partner's computer decided to die a gruesome death.
It rolled to despair.
It rolled to despair in a big way, I think.
We've had a few of those.
We have, and that kind of sort of nice segue, Martin, to get us into what's been going on. Because everybody would know that we've been off the airways for about 10 weeks, I think, at the time of this recording. So we've had a lot happen. have we not?
We won't tell them the dark truth of what happened.
What is the dark
We
truth?
recorded about 5 shows, but GM Hooly forgot to press record.
You can wish that was the case. No, we've had all sorts of things. We've had stuff happen with Chris. We wanted to do
It's all Chris's fault.
Yeah, all Chris's fault.
Here we go.
No,
Truth
it's not.
comes out.
But we've had all sorts of stuff go on with Chris. We've had all sorts of stuff go on with each of us. So
And the soundboard blowing up.
And the soundboard blowing up was probably the big thing.
So much so they replaced it.
Yep.
They did. I was a bit worried that we were going to be up for another board, but a lot of people online on Facebook did offer to throw in a few bucks. So hopefully, maybe later on down the track there might be a Patreon involved. But we'll talk more about that as time progresses.
But we do appreciate the offers.
Oh, absolutely! Thank you very much to all of those fans who did offer. It was greatly appreciated. But they were kind enough to replace it without too much hassle. But yeah. And then I've been doing this other silly thing for Fantasy Flight Games because they got me to do some. And this is a thing that I mentioned ages ago, and everybody sort of said, "Yeah, great story, bro," if you recall. So I'm now a little bit of a freelancer for FFG, doing Legend of the Five Rings, but hopefully that will lead into other things later on down the track.
Yeah, well, Legend of the Five Rings is another great game by FFG, and we have wanted to do some chatting about that at some point, and we'll get to that. But today is about something else.
Exactly right.
I just don't think people are going to get the setting. I mean, it's so.
And there's that sarcastic voice. All right.
I'm a walking ball of sarcasm, phlegm, piss, and vinegar.
Right. Well.
Yeah.
That's a very European drink.
Oh, wow.
Oh, dear. Okay. Well, I think that we should probably get on to the main part of the show. What do you think?
Don't you mean the core of the show?
Yes, I do.
I legit forgot that was a thing.
It's almost a bit like that.
It's been so long.
Let's move on to the show. Like, why not? Oh, there's a gag here. Gotcha.
Right. Core of the show. And welcome to Core of the Show, the segment where we will take a deep dive into a topic concerning the GeneSys Role Playing Game and, of course, gaming in general. Now, tonight we're going to continue our discussion from the previous episode on magic in the GeneSys Role Playing Game. Now, we'll be looking at talents, Terranoth, house rules, and magic implements. Plus, we're going to be answering a slew, well, knowing the conversation that we had before the episode, maybe not a slew, maybe 4 or 5, if we're lucky.
I also enjoy wishful thinking.
Well, it's all about wishes, isn't it? That's magic. Anyway, moving along.
I enjoy your wishful thinking and would like to subscribe to your podcast.
Dreams are free.
We'll be discussing the hows, the whys, and the whatnots of using magic. So grab your wands, fire up your cauldrons, kickstart your brooms, and open up your mystical tomes as we take another look at magic. So,
hey, Hooly. Hey,
yes,
Hooly.
Yes.
You said grab your wand.
Right. Thanks, Chris.
That's why I'm here.
So, look, before we get started, we should basically have a little bit of a revision on what we discussed the previous episode, and we'll just sort of like gloss over this. But if you haven't listened to the episode before, in episode 1 or part 1, stop now and go back and listen to part 1 because we're going to be talking about a whole heap of stuff there, which will get lost in translation otherwise. So let's just basically magic goes into a couple of key areas. So we've obviously got magic skills. We've got magic actions or spells, and then we've got magic maneuvers. So for magic skills, we've basically got 3 main skills which are in the core rules, which are Arcana, Divine, and Primal. Terranoth does go a little bit further, and it gives us 2 more skills, which is runes and verse. Now, each of those skills is based on a primary attribute, where we have Arcana is intellect, Divine is willpower, Primal is cunning, and then for Terranoth we have runes, which is also intellect, and then verse, which is presence. Now, the difficulty is based on the spell action type that you are using, and what you're trying to do, with additional bonuses and things like that for additional effects, and they stack on to the base difficulty of that particular skill. Now, obviously, as if you don't have the skill though, you can't cast using that skill. You must have at least 1 rank. That's something which is very, very specific to Terranoth, but I think it's a good rule to have.
Well, it's not as hard and fast in the core rulebook.
No,
it's
that's
suggested that that's how you do it.
Yep.
But there are other ways of handling it, and it goes into that in the core rulebook.
Yeah, I mean, Terranoth also goes so far as to say that if it's not a career skill for you, you can never ever have it.
Yep.
There are talents based around that, like Templar for one, allows you to gain, I think it's Divine as a career skill, so that you can have your warrior who suddenly becomes a paladin, that sort of thing. So, Chris, would you like to take us very briefly through the magic actions?
Yes, very briefly. We obviously covered this, ad nauseum in the last episode. But obviously, any of these magic actions, a spell obviously costs 2 strain. Whether you succeed or fail, it's applied after resolving. There is attack, which can use Arcana, Divine, Primal, or runes. You cannot concentrate on it. Mm-hmm. There is augment, which can use Divine, Primal, runes, or verse. You can concentrate on it. Barrier, Arcana, Divine, or runes. You can concentrate on it. Conjure, which can use Arcana or Primal, which makes a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. And yes, you can concentrate on it. Curse, Arcana, Divine, runes, and verse, which can be concentrated on. And then Dispel, Arcana and verse only, no concentration. And then Heal, Divine, Primal, and verse, no concentration. And then, of course, the wonderful utility spells, the one purples, as my players called it just a few hours ago.
Right.
Which you can use all skills for, depending on the appropriate effect. And there is no concentration because it is only used for narrative only capabilities.
Yep. Cool. So then we've got, we've obviously talked about magic action. So now we've got magic maneuvers. Martin, would you like to just briefly go over the 2 magical maneuvers that we have?
So there's really only 2. So there's counterspell, which is available to anyone. Any spellcaster can use this maneuver to stop another spell in effect. Mm-hmm. And there's concentrate, which is the real big one. And we'll be talking about this more later, but you can spend a maneuver to extend the duration of any spell through to the end of the your next action.
Yep.
And to clarify, when you say counterspell stopping a spell, you're just speaking narratively. It doesn't actually effectively stop a spell. It just upgrades the difficulty.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. Narratively speaking, that's what your goal is, but we're not getting into the specific mechanics. I believe we went into that last time.
Yeah, so I mean, if you're wanting to stop a spell that's currently active, that would obviously be dispel. But if we're talking about making it more difficult for people to cast the spell, well, obviously we're talking about counterspell.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep. So you could get a couple of people going with counterspell and make it really difficult to get any magic off in the one area, but yeah.
Yes, make it a magical hotspot, so to speak. Anyway, so one of the things that just talking about concentration and that sort of area, one of the questions that since our last episode that got raised a lot was the whole notion of, and we had a bit of a lengthy discussion about healing and how that actually works. That we sort of believe that, by rules as written, that basically, you couldn't heal yourself because it says engaged characters only in the description, which kind of, by the language that they've used, it sort of eliminates somebody else. And then we looked at other options that we could apply to increase the difficulty by 2 or something like that. Well, the question was supposedly asked of our good friend Sam Stewart, who has come back and said you can totally do that. You can totally heal yourself if you want. The difference is that we sort of didn't point out is that the cost of the 2 strain always occurs after the effects of the spell have been executed. So, and that's as per raw. So if you've been healed, and I think it's 1 advantage gets rid of the point of strain, you will always end up being 2 strain less.
Yeah, because you can't, if you're at 0 and you have you try to remove 2 strain.
Exactly right.
Good luck. You're not getting any effect.
And this pissed me off when I first heard it, and then I went into the rules and I'm like, God damn it, yes, they're absolutely right. And it was like, and the strain is suffered after the spell effects are resolved, and that's very clearly put in the rules. So, you cannot spam heal yourself. I mean, well, technically you could. It would just be at a total cost of 2 strain because you could then the next round heal strain you've just taken. But you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there were some other issues that came along with that created a whole heap of discussion, which was on the Facebook page, where I think Ricky Buxton, he led the charge with this argument, is that the story shouldn't, or the discussion shouldn't really be about whether you can do it mechanically. It's whether you should do it in a campaign.
You're running into a minefield with that theory, though, because what one person thinks they should be able to do and what they shouldn't be able to do is a whole matter of opinion.
Look, I guess it goes down to the whole theory that I know that Chris subscribes to, which is, the don't be a dick theory.
It's a good message for life.
It is a good message for life, yes. You've really got to sort of go, okay, should we be really acting like this? Is this sort of in the spirit of the game? And I mean, yeah, sure, you can do it, but at the same time, is that really...
if it's a problem at the table, and this goes for all the rules into a game, if there's one particular rule that you feel players are abusing, your GM just rule otherwise.
Yeah, that's true.
If it's an issue for you, step around it or fix it. Get creative with it. When someone, I think I brought this up last time we recorded, and as if someone's doing magic healing on themselves, get creative with those threat. If they roll some threat whilst healing, dish strain on them. Make the skin peel off the bones. Get creative with it.
Have those wounds they've just knitted up.
Yes.
Unknit.
There's lots of things you can do with it other than just, saying you can't do it. Make the players think twice about doing it. Make it not necessarily a risk-free maneuver or action, technically speaking. But there's
there's ways to handle it.
Yeah, there are.
Dude, even before this ruling came out, I was handling it in my own games through the use of a new additional effect that was there for heal, which was just a +1 difficulty that would allow you to heal yourself. So it's like, yeah, sure, you can do it, and it's just +1 harder.
Which mirrors healing yourself traditionally. In the core rules anyway. So.
Yeah, that's right.
Exactly. And plus, in the games I've run, we haven't run Terranoth yet. So, I mean, it's only available to Primal and Divine. And from a Divine perspective, from a role-playing perspective, if it's Divine magic, that type of selfless healing is going to be easier to perform on someone else, whereas it's a more selfish action to perform it on yourself. Therefore, it's harder to pull off, and that was kind of how we justified it.
Well, that's a perfect example of thinking out of the box and coming up with a cool way to...
Yeah, I mean, you've got a point. If it's a problem at your table, discuss it as a group, possibly even at session 0. And I know we always go back to session 0, but it's very, very important, is to set those expectations right from the start so that everybody's on the same page. Hopefully that will make a smoother transition so that it's available for everyone.
Well, there's one way one way of dealing with the player who has infinite hit points. Mm-hmm. Just keep throwing infinite number of enemies at them.
That is true. That's very adversarial, but sure.
Well, yeah, why don't they give them a few ranks adversarial too while you're at it? Good suggestion.
No.
Great. Very good. All right. On our last episode, we missed a couple of things which are pretty important, and we'll just cover off on those now, just in case they come up during the discussion. So, Michael.
So, basically, what we've got to cover in more expanded detail was spell effects that affected with a knowledge skill.
Yep. Okay, so what that's basically saying is that in the core rules, it talks about just having the knowledge skill. It doesn't actually talk about breaking them down. So most of the spells, when they start talking about, adding additional things based on your ranks and your knowledge skill, that then gets expanded when you start looking at Terranoth, when it has 4 different skills, one of which is obviously knowledge arcana, and then there's knowledge forbidden.
Knowledge law.
Knowledge law, sorry, my apologies. So knowledge law and knowledge forbidden.
And you can only use knowledge forbidden for this if you've got a specific talent.
Correct.
But it's a nasty talent.
It is a nasty talent. Now, Chris, you've got a few thoughts on this.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's in my play. That was the big thing. It's like there is no game of GeneSys you play where there is a skill called knowledge. I understand that's in the core book, but nobody does that. We always break out skills depending on what our individual setting is, and it's just that care needs to be taken in terms of defining in session 0 which skill is really going to apply in that situation. And I'll give you an interesting example. So in the beta I just played a few hours ago, okay, for my Aegis setting, there is no skill that's the equivalent of knowledge arcana. There is no skill, like the knowledges are very focused on superheroic actions and interactions with galactic cultures in terms of the knowledge skills, and I don't have anything like knowledge powers or knowledge Aegis or anything like that. And I thought I would get creative, and I thought this would be a lot of fun, to where I've got various special effects that are not increased by a knowledge skill, but are increased by other skills you have, which represent your knowledge in certain things. So to give you an example, for attack, there is a blast quality. And in the core magic rules, that blast that blast quality is the same number as your ranks in knowledge. Well, I went, what will be fun and thematic? Let's have it be your ranks in ranged heavy, because ranged heavy weapons are heavy and nasty and can often have blast qualities. So let's do that. That would be a lot of fun. But what it really, really did is it put a major clamp and a hamper on my players that I did not intend. And they were not willing to try because I don't have a lot of ranks in that. So kind of what's the point? Right. So, you want it to be a quote unquote knowledge skill that is reasonably likely to be taken by the appropriate spellcaster. So if it's an arcane effect, knowledge arcana, or knowledge divine, or whatever it is. If it's a maybe my personal favorite I've seen is knowledge spellcraft, which is just a general about magic in general.
Yep.
Yeah.
So yeah,
you could even just divorce it from the idea of it being a knowledge skill altogether, depending on your setting.
Yeah,
you could say that it is, practical knowledge or something, and give it a name relevant to your to the thing. So you could tie it to something like discipline, for example, and it has the same effect, but it is. You don't have to be a learned, scholar in order to qualify for this.
Well, if you're doing a good example, I imagine would be primal. You could tie that to survival,
resilience, even. No survival is better.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will caution against resilience. I had the exact same problem in this game I just ran because I had tied resilience to certain things. So, and basically, I mean, it's first of all, it's rare for a spellcasting class to have resilience anyway.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. If you're gonna make the tie, you need to make sure that the careers that have access to cast spells have all of them have access to the whatever skill it is, whether it's knowledge X or it's obviously for primal casters, they're probably going to have survival. I mean, the one thing you guys haven't brought it up, but as a caution to the listeners, in my alpha for a couple settings, I made the mistake. It actually worked in Harry Potter and it worked well, but Harry Potter is a high power magic setting. For other settings I've worked on, I made the mistake of saying, well, knowledge doesn't make sense, so I'll just make it equal to your ranks in the magic skill. Ooh. So if I'm okay. And that was, you all go, ooh, because you understand the rules well enough to realize, okay, that's seriously OP. Yeah. And it was seriously OP. So if listeners, if you're thinking that might be a solution, don't do it. Yep. Part of the balance of this is forcing that PC to put XP into two different skills in order to make a more powerful effect.
Yeah, and sort of what I was meaning before was that it should be a separate skill to your casting skill, but it shouldn't be divided into a whole bunch of different skills. It should be,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Cool. So we've also got another couple of points, Mike.
Another one. The fact is, now runes is something we're going to cover in a completely different episode.
Yeah, we've decided that it's going to be, that is an entire rules section to its own.
There's a lot.
But yeah, we think we can cover that a little bit more in depth because it's a cool mechanical effect, which Terranos does very, very well. So yeah.
But in short, with your rune skill, you can't use the skill without an actual rune. So it's the only skill. It's the only magic ability out there which actually requires a physical device. In this case, a rune. Without going into full details about it, people could also use a very similar mechanic in other settings of their creation, where runes are reskinned for something else, or you can use something very similar.
For example, in Knight's Edge.
Perfect example, yeah. We have a concept very similar to runes in Knight's Edge. It's different enough, but it's a magical device that your magic's keyed to, essentially.
Yeah, and you can't do it without it.
And also, depending on your setting, you may not be able to gain ranks in a spell skill unless it's a career skill. That's the case in Terranoth, but you will need to consider this for your setting, and I think that's a very important thing. Because you just don't want someone like your random warrior one day going, I want to chuck 5 XP into Primal, if it doesn't make sense for your setting. In your setting, it could make sense, but it's something that definitely has to be approached and looked at before you start playing, because you don't want your characters who weren't magic users one day suddenly waking up the next and being gods of magic.
Well, yeah, as I was mentioning before, with Terranoth, it's got Templar as far as the talent goes. But it says that you can only use it once per encounter, so you can only use one divine thing per encounter. And that creates a paladin.
Which is awesome. That's great that those options are there.
Yeah.
And that's one way you can bridge that, is by putting talents into your setting. So if someone does really want to become a spell user one day, they can argue that they've learned the spells. It's been the energy inside's been latent and it's awoken, and that's them buying the talent.
Yep.
End of the day, they've had to pay something for that privilege. And even then, with Templar, it comes with strings attached. So it's still not a pure, raw, unfettered magic ability.
I think there's another one in there that has it for verse as well. I'm not 100% sure.
Pretty much one. I may be wrong, but there's pretty much one for every one of the spells, spell casting types.
Yep.
The only one that doesn't have the restriction to once per encounter is the runes one.
Right.
And you can just do that, but once again, you need to have a rune, and they're rare in that setting.
Yeah, they are. Yeah.
To be able to cast at all. So you could take the talent and never be able to cast a spell.
That's right. So is there anything else that we should be talking about before we go any further? Chris, any other little points that we sort of maybe didn't touch base on that might come up during the next part of the discussion?
Not that come to mind immediately. Just go listen to the last episode. We talked a lot.
Indeed, we did for 3 hours.
It's hard to remember everything we discussed.
That is true, and it was a fair while ago. So yeah. All right, so let's talk talents. So, Chris, would you like to take us through the basics of magic talents?
Yeah, well, there's it's not a huge discussion until you get to Terranoth. I mean, in the GeneSys core rules, there are zero talents that represent magic use, none, because it's generic GeneSys core rules. Now, Terranoth adds a lot more. I think there's 12 total talents that relate to magic in some way in the Terranoth book. Yep. And I don't want to go through all of them. I mean, our listeners, if they have that book, they can read it. But those range, the most notable ones are probably Signature Spell, which is a really big one that inspired me with several custom talents that maybe we'll talk about later.
Yep.
Through then, there's of course minor talents which we just talked, like representative of what we just talked about, like Runic Lore or Templar, which allow you to gain a magic skill as a career skill, basically.
So when we start talking about the sort of talents which are in Terranoth, as well as looking at our talents that we may want to design for our own setting. Now, obviously, there's rules in GeneSys to start developing your own talents. But magic talents tend to be a little bit different. So maybe what we should do is firstly just take a look at what are some of the pitfalls for designing your own talents for a start. Chris, you've designed a few of your own talents for not only Harry Potter, but you've also sat down and designed some more generic talents for use during any regular sort of GeneSys game.
Yes, I have. So in terms of pitfalls when talent design, my hard-learned lessons are as follows. Listen, always err on the side of the player, but when it comes to magic, you've got to remember that things are always going to be at higher risk and more difficulty. So often, this might mean that a really cool magical talent, if you look at other talents and their basic effects and they say, oh, that's a tier 1, if it's a magic talent, consider making it tier 2. Okay, consider bumping it and making it a little harder to get access to. That's hard lesson 1. 2, more so than any other talent type, I learned this also very much the hard way, you need to really have a good reason for any magic talent to be ranked. Because magic is so powerful, typically you want a magic talent when you're crafting one from scratch to be non-ranked. So you know what? You can take it once, you get its benefit, and you're done. You can't keep pumping it and jacking it.
Yeah.
And then the last key point is we actually talked about this a lot in the last episode, is that if you have a specific magical effect that you want to encompass in your particular setting, in your particular game, and it's not covered in the core magic actions, and it's either really unusual or extremely powerful, consider making it accessible via a talent.
Yeah.
And I did that pretty extensively for Harry Potter, with things like Patronus Charm, the 3 Unforgivable Curses, the ability to be an animagus and turn yourself into a creature. Yeah.
Because I think that's something that, as you say, we touched base on in the last episode, where there's a lot of people which are out there that are saying, look, I can do this particular type of magic in X setting. Probably the one that gets the most spoken about would be D&D. That there are certain things that you can do in D&D that you don't seem to be able to do in GeneSys. So I think that's where I agree with you 100%, Chris, that's where you should be looking at talents to go, well, if I can't work out how to do it in the rules, chances are that a talent will be able to add an additional effect or something that you can do as a spell, but it will be linked to a spell skill.
Yeah, and I feel dirty because I feel dirty and filthy because you have to understand that as I kind of ranted about in our last show, I hate that entire logic and that entire line of reasoning. It's like, well, but in D&D you can this. Okay, that's great. We're not playing D&D.
Sure.
I mean, I could make the same argument, like, well, in Feng Shui, I can do a backflip through the air with 2 pistols and shoot the guys in the head, but there's no pistols in this setting. Yeah, we're not playing Feng Shui. It's like, I don't know. I have a major problem with that argument. If you're trying to compare this to D&D, they're different games, they're different systems. I don't understand that. Now, the reason I feel filthy and dirty is because I created 2 talents to kind of solve some of those conundrums and allow you to kind of somewhat recreate certain D&D spells.
Right, I see.
So I'm a bad boy and I'm filthy.
Well, perhaps we should talk about that.
Can I say filthy anymore? I've said filthy a lot earlier.
Yeah.
This is getting into dark territory.
Just replace it with dirty.
Just remember.
That's even worse than filthy and dirty. Mistress Flano.
No. Let's just stop it there.
Wow, I can see this turning into a I'm going to need an E on the podcast.
That's just some of the features to look forward to in the upcoming Patreon.
Oh dear. All right, well, touching base on that, Chris, perhaps we could use one of those to just explore how you can create your own talent to bring in some of those ideas to make it a little bit easier.
So let's talk about the talent I made that will let you cast Wall of Fire. How about that?
Cool. Let's do that, because
that
topic came up in the last episode. Absolutely, that sounds great.
Comes up a lot.
let's talk about that.
Let me tell you about my homebrew talent called Spellcraft Combination.
Ooh.
Okay.
It is a tier 3. I want to repeat that. Tier 3 talent.
Right.
Passive activation, and yes, it is ranked. Okay. When your character purchases this talent, when they purchase it, you select 2 spell action types, augment, barrier, curse, etc., that can be cast using the same magic skill. Your character can now cast a combined spell of both spell action types. The combined spell uses the combined base difficulties for both spell actions. It provides the base effects for both spell actions when it is cast, and it costs a combined amount of strain on the caster. So 4 strain instead of the normal 2 strain.
Wow.
Additional effects for both spell action types may be applied to the combined spell, but the difficulty of the spell still may not increase beyond formidable. Interesting.
I like it.
I like it as well. It feels a little bit like a meta magic talent.
Yeah.
Like meta magic feat. Yeah.
Precisely. It's a meta magic talent. It's tier 3. It's look, I've achieved a level of power in terms of magical casting where, as an example, I'm an arcane user. I want to cast barrier and I want to cast attack, both in the same spell. Okay, well, that's fantastic. Well, you take the base difficulties and you combine them together. Okay, so 3 purple at that point. And you know what? I want to add the range and the fire descriptor to it and make a wall of fire. Okay, that's 5 purple dice. There you go. Boom. And at that point, there's no futzing about well, how much damage would it deal? The same amount of damage your attack deals. Okay. I mean, yeah.
It certainly helps bridge the gaps that people may be struggling to bridge in terms of, well, can my spell do this? How can I do this spell? Combining 2 spells, especially with a bit of imagination, in game and narratively, you can pretty much do everything with this. But I do have one question about it. Concentration. Is there any additional costs for concentrating, keeping a spell like a combined spell concentrated?
Not in terms of the talent is written, mostly because I think concentration has its own native cost anyway.
Yeah. As a maneuver that has to be kept throughout.
I was just curious to know if there's perhaps because it's harder to keep it concentrated on because it's one big uber spell opposed to two.
And if you combine,
I think my assumption on this was that enough penalties have already been imposed on the player.
That's good. I'm just asking the question the audience will probably ask.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, of course, absolutely. And so my assumption is no, that enough penalties have already been imposed. Now, what's interesting about this with concentration is that it could theoretically allow you to concentrate on things that you not normally would be able to concentrate on. So to go back to the example of a wall of fire, I can concentrate on a barrier. I cannot concentrate on an attack. Well, if this is a combined spell that combines attack and barrier, yes, I can concentrate on it. And while it's up, anyone who touches it is going to take that attack damage, basically. So there is that. And also the reason it is ranked is very careful in the wording of the spell, or in the wording of the talent, that when you purchase it, you select 2 spell action types, only 2. So this isn't like a spellcraft combination talent that all of a sudden I can mix and match as I choose. When I take this talent, I have to pick 2 spell action types, only 2. And those are the 2 that I've studied well enough that I can combine.
Yep.
If I take this talent again, because it's a ranked talent, I get to pick a different 2.
I like it because it's like with a lot of disciplines in life, you when you first start out learning something, you get taught that there are these rules that are inviolable and they always apply. Yeah. And then as you progress and you become a master of this school, you learn that they never apply, or you can bend them.
Yeah, sure. Very good. No, so how did you actually go about sort of creating that talent, Chris? Was there a process that you applied that, maybe some of the listeners might be able to, utilize that knowledge when creating their own?
Somewhat and somewhat. So that particular talent went through several drafts that I was able to get on the table in just a quick encounter play test to kind of see how it played out. And I have to stress that this most importantly, and this is not easy for our listeners to do, and I'm sorry for that. But if you're going to homebrew a talent, you want to try and at least play test it in at least an encounter setting before you get it on the table to help you refine it.
Yeah. I was about to mention exactly the same thing. And don't be afraid to refine it, because I know a lot of players can be stubborn. They'll write a rule and go, "This is the only way it's going to be."
Yep.
Yeah.
And
and you got to set that expectation in session 0, especially if you're using a homebrew rule of any type, and say, "Look, this is what I've chosen. We're going to play it. If I think it's overpowered, if you think it's overpowered, then we're going to, or underpowered, or too difficult, then we're going to refine it."
Yeah.
For this particular talent, it's got some unusual capabilities for it. My thing is, with magic, things get so powerful and it's so much more restrictive. Your talents need to be a little more restrictive as well. And that line of reasoning led me to say, okay, well, you know what? Only select 2 spell action types. Okay. This is something that is very easily going to bring a spell to formidable territory. Okay, when you start combining base difficulties. I also wanted it to be harder. It needed to be harder to achieve. I knew that. So how am I going to represent that? Well, increase the difficulty. And I went through drafts where it was like, okay, increase the difficulty by 1, okay, or 2. And then it's like, okay, well, if the 2 combined spells have different base difficulties, what's the base that I then increase? And I went through drafts like that, and it was like, okay, well, no, let's just combine the difficulties. And obviously this needs to be not only harder to do, but harder on the caster. So in keeping with the theme of combination, if we're combining the difficulties, if we're combining the effects, it made sense to also combine the cost. So it's gonna give you 2 strain. And that has worked beautifully in play, better than I thought it would. It really makes players think about whether they want to do this and pull the big nuclear weapon out of their arsenal.
Yeah.
And then again, because it is so difficult and can get to formidable so easily, and because it represents a level of mastery that is you would kind of expect, I really made it a tier 3 talent, because tier 3 is really where you really start to see the break for those oh shit talents, basically, that those oh crap talents that are okay, wow, this is mastery at tier 3.
Yeah.
So yeah, it made sense where it fit. That was actually one of the first special talents I tried to make for Magic, and went through a couple iterations. And I made 2 others. One of them got iterated out into each Magic skill, so there's multiple versions of it. But really, I've created, in essence, 2 other custom talents for Magic, and it's seemed to solve a lot of my players' problems.
Yeah. And so that's basically like a focus is one of them, and that's sort of you've kind of reiterated that throughout all of the different types of spell actions.
Yeah, precisely. And this is a deconstruction of signature spell.
Yeah.
I think signature spell in Tyranoth is awesome, but I think it's incredibly limited. And a little too limiting for my players, actually. And so basically, they're focus spells. You can do attack spell focus, augment spell focus, et cetera, et cetera. And the spell focus talent is a tier 2, passive, non-ranked. When you purchase the talent, you select 1 additional effect for that particular spell that is worth +1 difficulty. And you just get to apply that additional effect for free. That's it. It doesn't cost the +1 difficulty.
Yep.
If the effect has the ability to be applied multiple times, like range, then you still have to add +1 difficulty for every time beyond the first that effect is applied. But yeah, it gives you a free effect basically. And it's non-ranked, so it's and I have this for each spell type. So you know what, if you do this for attack and you pick range, that's it. That's your spell focus. You can never get another quote unquote free additional effect for attack spells ever. If you take this talent, and that was kind of the limiting factor.
Yeah.
So just a quick question for you on the idea of limiting talents and going back to the original spellcraft combination talent. You said it was ranked, and you could get an additional 2 spell types on that action. Can you then mix and match all 4 types, or can you only combine the 2 that you choose on the next rank?
The latter. So when I take rank 1, I choose attack and barrier. When I take rank 2, I choose attack and curse.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean I can combine barrier and curse.
Perfect. Yeah, because otherwise you'd get everything, and then it sort of defeats the purposes of limiting it. So
precisely. And also realize that when you make a tier 3 talent ranked, you can only ever take it 3 times. That's it.
True.
Exactly.
And that has to be then you're limited by those 2, yeah? Is that what we're basically... That's how it works? Yep.
So you can only ever combine the 2 that you've selected, and when you select the next rank, you can only combine those 2 sets of 2 different spell actions.
Wow.
So you've got to think about, as a character, and this, I like it as a choice, as a character-building choice. Yeah. You're selecting what you're going to specialize in, which is cool.
Which is very cool.
So I guess there's something that I should bring up with talents.
Sure.
I think it, especially if fast forward 2 or 3 years down the line, when there's a heap of content out there for GeneSys, I can imagine Magic, especially because everyone loves Magic. There'll be a lot of potential talents floating out there.
Yeah.
You could potentially have a lot of stuff conflicting and a lot of stuff muddying the system up.
Yeah.
So I would be careful of how many talents you take on in your game, because you don't want Magic users sitting there and spending 10 minutes going through their talents, saying I could do X, Y, Z and make the world explode.
Yeah.
Because some talents, one person's design, like Chris, may be balanced in
as it stands. Yeah, absolutely.
But when you come along and bring someone else's talent from who knows where and slap it on with one of Chris's talents or whoever else, you suddenly can have this brutal, broken combination of things. So as a general rule, I'll just advise caution. Filter everything that comes through.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm so glad you said that, and because it's truth. But keep in mind that also when I look at like my custom Magic talents, and not just my generalized ones, but the ones I created for Harry Potter, the ones I created for Familiar, the ones I've created for Aegis, in those settings, every player character is a Magic user. That's the difference. Yeah, I want to give my players a bevy of talents to choose from, but they're all Magic users, so that makes sense. So, in other words, if I'm in a low Magic setting, it might make sense to have no Magic talents. And you got the mage in the party like, well, I can't cast Wall of Fire. It's like, yeah, man, that's insane. You've heard legend of that, but God, that's well beyond the abilities of any mage. I mean, Magic is not that powerful in our setting.
Yep. Yeah, because I mean, you've even got D&D settings where you've got Magic, which is very, very low. Is it Dark Sun? Dark Sun?
Yeah.
So when it's called, so it's very low Magic.
Perfect example of lowest of low Magic is Game of Thrones.
Yep,
it exists, but like it's super rare. It's to the point where people would laugh at you if you mention Magic.
Yeah,
I think that's a perfect example of you can have Magic in a setting, but it can be very, very low and very rare.
Even Conan, to an extent.
Yeah, it's very blood magic-y sort of feel to Conan. But yeah, you're right. It's definitely not high magic like generic fantasy is. And in those settings, take a bit of a left turn here, but those settings where magic's meant to be quite low, you could apply additional strain costs to casting those spells. Or casting those spells. Instead of costing 2, it could cost you 4.
Yeah.
Or cost you, in Conan type environments, it cost you 2 strain and 2 wounds.
Because with Dark Sun, that is all about how the magic has basically been pulled out of the earth, and that's the reason why you've just got this desolate plain. So yeah, that's a good example of that, where you've got to do that extra strain to pull it out. But as long as you're setting, again, with the expectations at the start, and you're saying this is how it's going to run, and this is how it's tailored to your setting, yeah, you should be fine. But no, I agree 100% with what you guys are saying, definitely. So yeah, so that's some good. Perhaps, Chris, we can make those available to our listeners, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we can probably get that up on and you guys are welcome to publish my little quick one-pager that has those talents. That also includes another talent they can read about, which is the duration upgrade talent.
I was going to bring this up.
Which allows you. Yeah.
It's very cool.
It's it certainly allows more of that. Okay, I'm going to cast a spell and I'm just going to let that go, and then move on to the next thing. Well, so
what does it do, Chris?
It's a tier 4. It's a tier 4 talent. I want to stress tier 4 talent. That basically it allows you to add a new. Basically, it gives you access to a new additional effect option for any spell that allows for concentration, and that's the duration additional effect. Plus two difficulty for that additional effect. But if you're successful, you may then spend 2 advantage to maintain the spell for 1 round without spending a maneuver for concentration, and you can trigger that multiple times.
I do like this thing that you've done here, Chris, by having an extra effect tied to a talent. Yeah. That's a cool way of bringing more effects into Magic without having to rewrite the entire Magic rules. Yeah. You just have it reliant on the players and what they bring to the game, essentially.
Yeah.
So you can have things like teleport, but it's linked to, because obviously teleport isn't just teleport. I mean, you've got Dimension Door that's thrown in there as well, and all of those sort of movement talents. Why can't you have like teleport as a standard and then improved teleport and then supreme teleport, where you're sort of increasing as you're progressing, but one might be a tier 1 or a tier 2, and then it progressively goes up from there. So
one way of handling.
You can certainly do things that isn't covered in the rules.
Yep.
Create a talent, or looking at creating the talent. I mean, that's something that we can also look at doing ourselves and putting it up on via the mic stand or some of the stuff that I've been doing or whatever. So
just always be careful of how many talents you're introducing.
True.
And what GM Chris has done with his talents, he's aired on the side of making them cost more. Yep. And so the talents, even though it's tier 4, the duration effect mod is still costing you two additional difficulty dice.
The talent just unlocks the effect.
Exactly.
It's still a bitch. It's still a bitch of an effect to pull off.
And I mean, you've still got that limiter that you can't go any higher than 5 anyway.
Yeah, and it's a powerful effect though. Like, not having to spend maneuvers to maintain a spell is impressive.
It's from a general game like design perspective. Yep. When you're designing anything, talents for Magic or for whatever, or skills or any special rules for a game, it's best to err on the side of making it more taxing to the player, and then toning it down when you need to.
Yep.
Because players love it when you tone their difficult stuff down if it's too difficult, but they hate it if you tone it up. If it's too easy. So it's easier to wheel it back than it is to crank it up. So.
To ramp it up, absolutely. And on that note, I think probably the last important thing to talk about if you're going to be designing your own talents for Magic is there's one other very strong talent option for Magic that I think is very viable in the majority of settings, and I think a lot of GMs should consider. And we take a cue from Tyranoth, and that is creating talents that unlock Magic as a career skill for the character.
Yeah.
Because Tyranoth has talents related to this, and I think it's entirely reasonable. That should be relatively low cost, probably tier 2 or maybe even tier 1. But even in the GeneSys core rulebook, you've got stuff, you've got talents that add career skills to your list, and you can do the same for Magic. My only caution there, again, another hard-learned lesson from experience, and talking about how magic things should be a little more restrictive. When you look at those talents that add career skills in the GeneSys core rulebook, they almost always add 3 skills. Okay, so it's like, you get these 3 skills are now career skills for you. Okay, with magic, that talent should put one single skill, and it should be one single magic skill in your career list, and that's all it should do.
Very true.
There's a particular reason why in Terranoth that exists, is because you cannot cast at all unless it's a career skill.
No,
for you.
That's right. Exactly.
Yep.
Unlocking a magic skill on a talent is kind of cool, because if you really wanted to, you could tie that talent to an object. So, for example, like you have a talisman. A character picks up a necklace, which is a just magic talisman. And while they have that necklace on, they have that talent. But if someone takes that necklace away, they no longer have that talent, and therefore don't have access to that skill anymore to cast spells.
Look, one of the things, though, that to keep in mind, and this is sort of goes back to something that Sam said to us at one stage, that when you're looking at like species, I think we spoke about at one point, that you shouldn't be adding, like, as in Star Wars, it sort of says gain 1 rank of this particular talent. And it's always a ranked talent. And the reason why you shouldn't do that is because it kind of creates that confusion of, do I now have an extra rank 1 talent? So I think that if you're going to do something like that, 100% agree with you, but maybe not just call it a talent. Maybe just call it a special ability or whatever else. But
if it's not a tiered talent, it's not a problem.
Yeah, true.
Well, no, because this is where you get into problems with the skill, the talent pyramid.
Yeah, the pyramid.
You just don't call it a talent, and you're all good.
You just call it an ability, and sure, it may almost mirror word for word, and it's called something else. But yeah, you just don't do that. So, but certainly something similar to that. Some of the abilities.
It can be the exact same thing.
Yeah.
You just don't call it a talent, and you don't run into problems with the way the rules are written.
Exactly. But I tell you what, with all of this, 5 purple difficulty maximum, you know what will fix that problem? That's implements.
Yes.
And that brings us to the next part of the discussion. Nice segue there.
Great.
That's fortunate.
Segue.
Isn't it right? So there are a number of different implements that we see in the core rules. So we have druidic circles, we've got holy icons, magic orbs, magic rings, magic staffs, staffs? Whatever. We're Australian, we'll say it however we like. And then you've got magic wands, and then Terranoth brings in a few extra ones, which is a magic scepter, a magic tome, and a musical instrument for those who are using the verse spell.
And it does also introduce runes, but we'll get to that another time.
We will, yes, that's true. So let's very quickly just go over what each of these do, and we can discuss briefly what sort of cool things you can do with it. Because some of them, and we found while we were discussing it before the start of the episode, that depending on how it's worded, it can get a little bit confusing. But once you got your head around it, you're fine. So with druidic circles, you can summon an ally. Summon ally effect, which means that if you're summoning a creature, that it's not going to immediately start attacking you. By some small percentage chance, if you rolled as a despair or something like that, that you automatically, that it's on your side. So
and you can control its actions.
Yeah, exactly. So summoning an ally does not affect the difficulty. And also, additionally, that creatures remain until the end of the encounter. So that's your typical, summon monster and it lasts 3 turns or whatever else as we see in D&D. So very, very simple stuff. Holy icons, which it uses the divine effects cost 1 difficulty less. So any sort of there are special effects which are in the rules, which have that divine descriptor. They basically cost 1 difficulty less. What is one of those? Is a good example.
I think it's called Sanctuary.
Right. Your favourite. You mentioned
barrier.
that last time.
It's great.
Oh, no, it was Chris. You like Sanctuary.
Yes, I'm also a Sanctuary fan.
Right.
I think many of us like Sanctuary.
So that is one difficulty less than what it normally costs. And then wounds healed using the heal action also increased by 2, which is very cool.
Sick.
I know. Then we've got magic orbs, which additional targets and additional summon don't increase the difficulty, which is very powerful. Which I think is amazing.
Oh, personally, my favorite so far is that Druidic Circle.
Yeah,
you don't have to concentrate; just keep summoning those monsters.
Have an orb and a circlet, and you're laughing. And then additionally on top of that, attack actions increase the base damage by 3, which is very cool as well. Magic rings. Now, this one's a little bit confusing, but magic rings, it's linked to a magic skill. So it's either, attack, augment, or whatever else. Then you choose 2 effects from that that increase the difficulty by 1, and 1 that increases the difficulty by 2. Those effects don't increase the difficulty, but you always upgrade once. So, what's one that gives us 2 purples? Mutton, for example, or even 1 that's in the. Let's say it's an attack ring.
Yeah, no, sorry. Empowered is the only one that costs 2. Deadly is only a 1.
Right. Okay. So let's use deadly. So if you've got you're firing at short range, so that'll be 1 purple because it's a base of 1 purple difficulty. It then would normally be increased by 1, but the deadly is inside the ring. So with that, the difficulty gets reduced by that 1, so it's only going to be 1 purple. But that 1 purple is upgraded to a red.
Yes.
Pretty much.
But it gets crazier when you pick all of the effects from the 1 action.
Yeah. That is true. The thing. That's the thing.
Yeah. Look, the other thing as well that we have to remember is that as I said, it gets not only additionally to getting upgraded, there's a 2 despair would normally or can be used to destroy a magic item. For rings, that doesn't apply, so it can't actually be used in that way. Then we've got magic staves, whatever. That they ignore the first range difficulty increase, which, if you're firing at long range is going to make things a little bit easier for you by an extra purple dice, which is cool. And then attack actions, they increase their base damage by 4. We've then got magic wands, which is everyone's favourite, I think. You choose 1 effect that increases the difficulty by 1. It no longer affects the difficulty. And then attack actions increase the base damage by 3.
Cheap and easy to come by with a great effect.
Indeed. Now, Chris, did you use that type of wand, or when you did Harry Potter, or did you reduce what they do?
Neither. I took the implement as it was written and kind of threw it in the trash.
Right.
I created an entirely separate system for wands. The only implement in Harry Potter that has mechanical effect is a wand. So depending on it was ironic. I wrote all this before Tyranoth came out, and
right.
when you take a look at some of the implement materials that were in Tyranoth, I was like, but that's what I did. When you get a wand, it has 2 attributes. It has the wood it's made from, and it has the core of the wand. And I reduced those to 8 different wood types. Like dark or adventurous. It's like dark is like blackthorn and a couple of yew and a couple others and things like that. But the wood would provide a concrete benefit to a skill check of some type, either allowing you to remove setback die, or in some cases letting you gain a boost die in certain circumstances. And sometimes that would be a magic skill. Sometimes it would be a non-magic skill. And then the core would allow you to do weird stuff with the effect of a spell. So like one of the core options would let you, for example, turn 2 failure into 2 threat.
Wow.
All right. Once per session. So stuff like that. So I took a very, very different tact with it.
Cool. So yeah, that just goes to show, I guess, that use the core rules as a basis for what you want to do, but don't be constrained by it when you're designing your own system.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, so then we've got actually, just before we go any further, one of the things that they have in Terranoth that they talk about implement material. They have bone, oak, hazel, willow, and yew, which works very similar to what you're saying, Chris, as well. So, which is kind of cool. But yeah, you can use when you're creating magic items, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. The final 3, which are Magic Scepter, which is you add a boost die to your checks. Its close combat effects do not increase the difficulty. So normally a close combat would increase the difficulty by 1. Well, it completely ignores that. And then attack actions increase their base damage by 2. So it's like a magical club, for want of a better term. Then you have the Magical Tome, which you choose 2 effects that do not increase the difficulty by more than 3. So you can have your mage walking around with his tome or her tome and be casting spells like a crazy person. And then lastly, you've got the musical instrument, which when using verse, you do not increase the difficulty for additional targets. So if you want to create the Pied Piper, that's what you're using. So yeah.
So there's something I'd like to mention.
Yes.
Important things to know when considering magical implements.
Right.
2 hard and fast rules. You can never combine 2 different magical implements to gain both of their effects. You can't do it. Maybe that's fuel for a talent. I don't know.
That's dangerous.
That's dangerous. Bad idea. Don't do that.
Don't do that.
Dual wands.
Double wand wielder.
Oh dear God.
But the other thing to mention is that normally when you've got something in your hands and you're trying to cast a spell, it imposes a setback. Magic implements don't do that. Just things to keep in mind.
Yep. Very true. Anything you'd like to add, Chris?
No, that's it, man. I mean, that's really it. I can tell you, I forgot the first time I ran Magic. I forgot that you couldn't use 2 implements at once. Right. And that was a bad thing to forget.
It gets crazy.
Yeah. And then just a couple of other points as well, which we're not going to go into, but Terranoth itself provides 17, count them, 17 magical items on page 108.
Hold up, I'm counting them.
There are 17.
I'm going to count them.
Right. Okay. Well, wait.
Hold the show.
No.
But Hooly,
yes.
What about alchemy?
Well, that's a very good question. And alchemy does allow you to create brews, like healing potions and things like that, which is it. I really like the way that they handled this as far as, how do you work out the difficulty for doing something like that? And it's as simple. You look at the rarity of whatever it is, and that you then halve that, rounding up, and that's the difficulty to create it. Very, very simple.
And keep in mind, this is before Terranoth. I went alchemy crazy for my Harry Potter setting.
Obviously.
Yeah.
I wrote an entire section in the magic chapter on potions.
Right.
And I changed the name of the alchemy skill to potions because that's obviously a huge effect of Harry Potter.
Yep.
But in that, I love the rules there because it allows you to do what alchemy can't, which is, again, I feel so dirty, but it allows you to replicate those D&D potions. All right, you could replicate a potion of bull strength. You could replicate a healing potion. You could replicate all those things potentially.
Yeah.
So yes.
That's very, very cool.
And yeah. And interestingly enough, I don't know if I don't know if we have any time to go into any of those rules here. There's a lot of them, but from my alchemy. But I think it is worth noting that my Harry Potter theme here in just about a week. Will be available for all. We've passed the paywall at this point from the Kickstarter. It will be available for all in the backer zone at d20radio.com.
Very good. We will make sure that we put up a link on our Facebook page for that.
Yeah.
Before we move on from alchemy, a lot of people probably who aren't playing in a fantasy setting would just go, I'm never going to use that in my cyberpunk setting.
Yeah.
However, you definitely can. Just call it something else. Call it like program, like I don't know, programming or something. I don't know. Rename it to a suitable sci-fi name.
Yep.
Chemistry.
Chemistry. There you go. Well, no, I'm thinking something a little bit better than that.
Yeah.
Yes, chemistry. You could do that definitely as well.
Yep.
Be working with that. However, you could also go to one extreme. Who says the potions you're drinking are potions? Maybe they're just data spikes you plug into your skulljack, and they give you the same effect, but in a cyberpunk skin sort of way.
That's interesting.
Absolutely.
That's cool.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I
was reading online. Some guy was doing a theme based on Penny Dreadful.
Right. Yes.
And he took alchemy and turned it into alienism.
Right.
Which was the term appropriate thing where it's not magic. It's science. It's just science we don't understand yet. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And the idea of making a serum or a tonic like Dr. Moreau style, and drink this, and yeah.
We're about to start a Dark Heresy campaign, so that's something I could look at and bringing into Dark Heresy some 40k styled grimdark alchemy.
Please don't. It's terrifying.
Now, one of the things I loved about my potion creation rules, and you need to reference them, is that depending on the advantages and threats rolled on the potions / alchemy check, the draft you create has unintended side effects. Yep. And that is something that would play heavily into any 40k setting.
That's how you get Mr. Hyde, isn't it?
Potentially.
Oh dear. All right, so we've talked a lot about the sort of different types of things that you can do with magic items that to help support magic and talents that you can also use to do things that you otherwise can't do. But this is GeneSys, and our listeners would love to hear our ideas on creating magic in their system, as well as how to convert their magic or their favourite games into GeneSys. A lot of the discussion that people have had online, very similar to an episode that you ran, Chris, way back whenever. I think it's episode 35, which was Kung Pao Chicken. Which talked about how do you convert people to use GeneSys from that more sort of D20 mentality. What did in that episode? I mean, if anybody wants to go back and listen to that episode on the Order 66 podcast, by all means do so. There are a lot of relevant things here.
But no one listens to Order 66.
That is true.
No one listens. But no, I'll pimp it out. And specifically, and this is for every listener of GeneSys, I don't care if you're a Star Wars player or not. Episode 24 is what it was. 24. And the episode's called Kung Pao Chicken. And pretty much the latter half of that episode, you can skip ahead away from Star Wars stuff. That's fine. When we start talking into how to convert someone to playing the new Star Wars system, everything we talk about, everything, a good half a dozen major points to consider and tips and tricks all apply to GeneSys. From getting them comfortable with the funny dice to dealing with abstract movement, to hitting the reset button before session 0 even starts. And we talk about all of that.
Yeah. It's, I mean, we may do something similar to our to that at a later stage, but honestly, you guys covered it so well. I would just direct people towards that because, as you say, it is very, very relevant. It's completely translatable. And it does mention one thing that a lot of people seem to forget because that, sometimes GeneSys is the round hole and they're trying to fit a square peg into it. Sometimes this game isn't for you. And I think that's important to sort of mention. I know that this podcast is obviously all about GeneSys and all about trying to convince people that GeneSys is a really good, solid game system that is completely narrative that you will love. And I mean, I don't think that I tend not to go back to any game system now that doesn't use the narrative dice, except now I'm playing Legend of the Five Rings. Anyway,
which arguably has its own narrative.
Its own narrative tool. That's right. Yeah. But and I'm certainly not going to be sit here and be all elitist or edition elitist or anything like that. But there are going to be some people that you are never going to convince, and you have to get to the stage of just going, you know what, maybe this isn't for you. If you're finding it so difficult to play in this setting or play using this system, go and play D&D.
Yeah, because I think everything you said, that this system is an amazing system, an amazing tool. It is perfect for a narrative storytelling game. That isn't what everyone's looking for.
No, that is true.
It also, in the middle of those 2 points, I find GeneSys and Star Wars an extension. This probably ties heavily back to the Kung Pao Chicken episode of Order 66, but this system relies heavily on a good introduction. If someone comes into this game with a GM or a player group who don't really understand the system themselves, that person's not going to get the full effect of GeneSys. They're going to go, well, what is this? What do you mean I can do this, but maybe this, but sometimes this? It comes across as wishy-washy if it's not applied as it should be applied.
Yep.
And I've seen it firsthand. A lot of new players will come in and then just go, oh, it's not for me because I want a system which has rules. This system has rules. It's just the extra stuff on top. You need to know how to understand that and interpret that. If you miss the nuances of that, you're going to struggle.
Yep.
That's why you need
an entire generation of role players was raised through the D20 mechanic, which is a great mechanic, to think binary at the table. And the system asks more from you than that.
And it gives so much more control to the players so that they can make a decision what goes on. So that and I know that you guys spoke about it heavily, is that it's less about the GM telling the players what they're doing and more about the players telling the GM how the setting is going to run, purely based on things like advantages and threats and flipping destiny points and things like that.
It's that.
So there's a whole new problem now that we didn't even have in play back when we did that episode of Kung Pao Chicken. Okay, that episode was all about convincing players. Dude, in the past year, I've seen a wholly different problem that is just as concerning: having to convince a game master. All right, a new GM, and it comes down to one thing, and it relates exactly to what you just said. Unlike other systems, in this system, as a GM, you have to be completely comfortable with your story and your plans going off the freaking rails because it will happen all the time.
Yeah.
You see, I see that as... Yeah. Oh, sorry to interrupt. I see that as one of the strongest points of this.
Yeah. But if you've been GMing for so long in a system which isn't it's more that sort of adversarial system. That I don't mean that in a negative way. That's just the way that the game is. That, as you say, Chris, you do have to get used to, doing things completely different to the way that you were before, and completely letting the players take control of where the narrative goes.
Well, I think in the case of D&D and similar games where the GM can spend hours crafting a combat. he doesn't want to let go of control, because if he does that, then why has he sat there and spent 3 hours crafting a single encounter? But in the beauty about this system is you don't need to craft any encounters. You just need some NPC cards up your sleeve, if that. And then you just go, okay, here's the encounter. You outline it, off you go, because there's no CRs to worry about or anything like that. D&D, it's a very core structure of it. It really encourages the GM to maintain control, because the game without control from the GM falls apart very quickly, because you need the GM there sitting in the driver's seat dictating which monsters are coming into the fight and how they're going to counter the players, because if he doesn't put that work into it, then every fight in D&D, especially at higher level, the players will walk over and a combat that's not sculpted well for that party.
I had this exact conversation with one of my friends last night. I was at an engagement party, and afterwards, we got talking, and he's like, "Oh, we could have he's a big D&D fan. We could have run a game. We had everyone here. We got the dice. I could have cracked out this random dungeon generator, and it could have told me, all of the monsters and everything. And I'm like, we could have just run GeneSys, and
not need anything.
We wouldn't need anything.
Just crack out my brain.
You guys would have told me what was happening.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, you would have generated the dungeon for me.
Yep, that's right. Yeah. But to bring it back to Magic a little bit, yes, Michael.
How did we get on that conversation?
Well, that's a very good question. But the week,
because I'm pretty sure whoever's listening to our podcast is probably sold on GeneSys if they made it this far.
Maybe not. I don't know.
Some random person's like, "What's this GeneSys about?"
I don't know. But
to one particular episode, I'm sold.
It is a good. It is a good topic.
I knew where Hooly was going with this, because when you talk about all the benefits and potential pitfalls that we've just discussed, none are more prevalent than they are in the Magic system. I love the Magic system in GeneSys so much because it crystallizes the fundamental discipline of narrative role playing that is at the heart of GeneSys.
Exactly.
It can go off the rails at the drop of a hat, and when you get into additional effects and how Magic is done, it is the epitome of player controlled narrative.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I can't say it any better than that.
Yeah, I don't think anything needs to be added. That's it.
So yeah. So but no, that is essentially Magic in a nutshell. However, we've got a lot of questions about that sort of thing. But is there anything else that you think that we haven't really sort of covered that perhaps our listeners may be interested in?
Yes. One thing of very strong importance to me.
Go.
And this is a tip for every GM. Another thing I have learned through hard experience. If you are running a first-time game, and especially, I don't care if it's experienced players, if you are running a one-shot at a convention or a single one-shot of play at home, if you introduce Magic, because it is so narrative, because it is so mix and match ultimate menu of being able to do whatever you want, more than anything else in this system, and the major detriment to this is until a player gets comfortable with it. And once they do, that light switches on and it never becomes a problem again.
Yep.
But until they get comfortable with it, you will suffer from serious analysis paralysis at the table.
Yep.
And I've experienced it with Magic again and again and again and again, where the player's like, "Okay, what are you going to do?" And they're literally staring at the additional effect tables, trying to craft stuff in their head. And that's the fun of it, but it really slows down the table. So my best suggestion for anyone who is doing a game with pre-gen characters, cheat sheets. Cheat sheets that have all the spell effects and additional effects on them, which you can fit onto a 2-pager so that they can have handy. But then beyond that, and I have to give props to one of our D20 Radio community members, Darren West, who actually first made this suggestion for me, and it totally changed my one-shots forever, and I will do it forever. And this is what I call the spell recipe list.
Right.
So the way Magic works in GeneSys, you can cast any spell your skills can cover. You're not limited to anything. But that is not a reason that you can't hand a small index card to a character who's playing a pre-gen and say, "Hey, by the way, these are 3 spells that you know really well. They're a part of your repertoire. And what you, as the game writer, the adventure writer, have done is you've put together 3 quick spells, maybe even given them cool names that are just a pre-made mix and match of a core spell action type and 1 or 2 additional effects added on. And it gives that player something to grab onto and look to immediately to prevent the analysis paralysis.
Yep.
And that's something that veteran players can bring to the table. If you're a caster and have a couple of, spells you're always casting because they're always utility, just write them down on a card with your recipe, essentially, with what's required to cast it, and then get creative with it. And as Chris just said, name it and get fluffy with it and make a cool little spell. And in one glance, you can go to the GM, I'm going to cast this. And after 3 or 4 sessions, that GM is probably going to know what that spell is and be ready for it without having to sit there and ask you what's its effect, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It really gets the game going.
And it adds to the flavor of the campaign. If you say, I'm casting, Raziel's, flaming fire of doom, because that's your character.
Make the spells a part of your character or an extension to your character.
Yep. And then if you're finding that you're using it all the time, signature spell.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, if you're using it all the time, go ahead and make it a signature spell.
Yep.
But as you can imagine, for Harry Potter, this was an incredible benefit, mostly because it also provided a touchstone to the player where you have very strong canon spells that the player wants to be able to cast. You know what I mean? Petrificus Totalis, Wingardium Leviosa, and you could put that on this recipe sheet. It's like, oh, wow, that's how I do this spell. And what I saw consistently is that for the first encounter, maybe the first 2 encounters, the players would constantly be referring back to this recipe sheet. But somewhere around the halfway point between the second encounter and certainly by the third encounter, they literally threw them away. At that point, they had enough comfortability and knowledge in the magic system that they were just looking at the additional effects sheet and crafting their own spells on the fly.
Yep.
And that's the proud papa moment as a GM that you want to get to.
Exactly. I know that with the Terranoth playtest, the Gen Con module, that's exactly what they did for spells as well, and it's a great idea. So if they're doing it, and the stuff that Chris West has done, Darren West has done, it's absolutely fantastic. So the great tip. Any other tips that you might have?
I think we've pretty covered it.
Pretty much. Yeah.
Well, I'll say it again. I'm sure I said it many times last episode.
Yep.
Don't be afraid to bring magic out of fantasy settings.
Yep.
If magic, as it's like raw magic, works in your sci-fi or modern setting, leave it as that. If you want to reskin it as high fantasy sci-fi, like your spells are high-tech powers, reskin it as that too, and it works just fine.
Yeah. So if you want to do your Dresden Files, that works.
I said last episode, Mass Effect is a perfect example.
Yeah.
100%.
Mass Effect is a great example. If you're doing a modern setting, reskin it as psionics.
Yep.
You've got superheroes. You could be reskinning them as powers, stuff like that as well.
Oh, that would never work.
Because you kind of did. That's exactly how you did yours, wasn't it, Chris?
Precisely.
Yeah, exactly. And I know that's how I'm trying to. Now that I've finished my other responsibilities, I can get back to doing the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
That would be marvelous.
That would be marvelous. And doing stuff like that. Reskin it. Good plan. So, questions. Holy but people have them. So, perhaps we should get into another little segment that we do.
Perhaps we should get behind the screens.
Good plan.
Behind the Screens.
And welcome to Behind the Screens, where we, the hosts of the show, will answer your games and rules questions regarding the GeneSys Role Playing Game. Now, tonight, to stay on theme of our magical discussion, we have listened to your questions, and we're going to give a whole heap of them a bit of a crack, or as many as we can in the next 30 minutes, 20 minutes, however long, because I know what our discussions are like when we start asking questions. So, GM Huzz, perhaps you'd like to take us through our first question.
I can do that. The first question question comes from Brian Dunton. He asked this on Facebook. I finished listening to your last episode. While I listened, it occurred to me that there is one classic type of magic that doesn't seem, to me, to be easily mapped by the core rulebook. Illusions. Maybe it's too many years of D&D talking, so I ask, some elements of illusions could be a flavor of existing magic actions. Creating a distraction could be a type of curse action, for example. But how about creating a full image of an item, a wagon or a corpse? What would that be, a conjure action? What about invisibility? Would your barrier augment or curse? Am I overthinking it? Any input would be welcome.
That's a really good question. The first thing that that comes into my mind is that it's an illusion. So why not reduce the difficulty by 1? That it's an illusion. So it's it could easily cover any of those things that they're talking about.
Well, my suggestion, and similar to the fire, what I suggested for fire, but conjure. You're conjuring an illusion. You are putting something on the field which the players play with.
Yeah. So yes.
The one thing it doesn't cover though, conjure can be used, as it suggests in the book to, create difficult terrain and things like that.
Yep.
But the one thing it doesn't cover, and is mentioned in this question, is invisibility. How do you make yourself invisible?
That to me, because, invisibility, let's talk D&D for a moment. Invisibility is what, a 3rd level spell? Second level spell? I'd be thinking, maybe a talent? Maybe? I'm not sure.
Now you can't answer everything with talents.
No, I know you can't.
It's probably an augment.
I would say augment.
Augment, yeah.
Because the ability to not be seen, that's an augmentation.
Yeah, that's true.
And you can explain.
It's true, but I know that augment is not allowed with Arcana.
Yes, indeed.
Yes, that's true. Well, you've got barrier. Is barrier...
You block light.
Why not?
I don't know. It's a tricky one, invisibility.
Dude, why not?
Yeah. That's just the special effect that it gives you.
Look, yeah.
I mean, you're creating a barrier around yourself. It's just that you're bending the lights or whatever else. I mean, obviously, it's not going to be, base difficulty. There is going to be an additional effect. But, To
be honest, I'm surprised illusion or something similar to that isn't a defined thing in the GeneSys rulebook. Like, there's so much you can do with illusion. It's interesting. Or, you know what would work? Influence. That would be a really good sort of mental influences. So you trick everyone around you not seeing you. That could be a interesting way of doing it.
That would be a curse.
Yeah, well, there you go.
That would be a curse, yeah.
I really like the simplicity of the idea of using conjure to create things on the field if you're going for, that type of illusion. But if you're trying to hide yourself or things like that, curse is probably the way to go. And it does the main core action of, affecting their dice of that curse plays into that. As you suggest, it's, you're tricking their mind to, not perceive you.
I like the idea of curse for illusions because it lends itself also to the check being, instead of having a base difficulty, being an opposed check, which is another staple of the illusion concept of illusion magic.
The one thing that I do want to mention, though, I feel like is relevant, is Sanctuary, which is a divine only enhancement to the barrier skill.
Yep.
Which sort of does what we want invisibility to do. You just can't
attack.
You just can't attack them.
That's a good point.
But you extend it to the, you can't see them.
Yeah. So that's how you explain it narratively, that you can't be attacked, but it's just,
It's a little bit beyond that. It's a little bit beyond the basic Sanctuary.
Maybe we have an additional effect here. Maybe we have an additional effect for barrier powers called invisibility that can only be used with the Arcana skill.
True.
Potentially. Yeah. But it's not opposed. Which it isn't really in D&D.
But I mean,
that's why it's great to use it with barrier, because barrier is rarely would a barrier skill check be opposed. So that makes total sense.
Yeah.
I'm liking this, but I think that's highlighted one thing, that there is no one correct answer for doing a special effect.
Yeah, I think we've come up with some good ways of how to apply it in a game.
Yeah.
But
actually, I think I have another idea for it.
Okay.
Enhance, right, allows you to add stuff, increase the your ability on skill checks, correct? Augment, sorry. So maybe you can augment someone's stealth to the point where they're near invisible.
Yeah, and that's the way a druid would do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, this is the thing. There's so many ways to achieve quote unquote invisibility, and to use the caller's or the writer's question D&D. I mean, yeah, there is classical invisibility, but there is magical spells in D&D that can meld you with shadow or give you a hazy or insubstantial shadowy form. There are druidic items and things like that can blend you with nature and give you that sort of natural camouflage. And yeah, there's just different flavors of accomplishing the ultimate thing, which is not being seen, and thus it could be done with different spell actions and different skills as appropriate.
I mean, the other thing to take into consideration when you're looking at this, and I know this question is probably going to come up in our list of questions as well, but
spoilers,
is that if a player says, I want to do this, but it's not covered in the rules, there is nothing that says that the GM can't just say it's going to be 4 purple dice.
Yeah. Well, so utility spell is quite useful for. It's like your catchment for everything that's a bit weird.
Yeah, but that's more
out of press.
Yeah, I mean, utility is
you're limited to 1 purple on that.
Yeah,
no, that's true.
Yeah. So I'm just talking about like if somebody says, right, well, I want to use barrier to do blah, and you get them to describe how they're doing that. Key. So narratively, they're saying, oh, I've got this. And we go, okay, well, that's going to be 4 purple, but it's not really how it's designed. So have a couple of setback as well. You know, and I know we will probably do an episode about difficulty at a later stage, I'm sure, like maybe the next one. But that's what you've got to look at, is that sometimes it's not just necessarily what it is in the rules. Sometimes you can actually do stuff on the fly, and it's up to the GM to go, well, this is how difficult I think it should be.
And as we've demonstrated, there's multiple answers to the one question, and what it comes down to is the flavour surrounding that. If your player doesn't know, or knows what they want to do, but they don't know exactly how to do it within the rules, get them to explain how their character's achieving that effect, and then apply, your logic skills to how you're going to squeeze that in.
Yeah,
exactly.
Don't be shackled to the rulebook because it's just guidelines.
Winner.
Agreed. Very good. Martin, what is our next question?
Edward Kelly has asked us, in the last episode, you mentioned a wall of fire causing damage. Where do you get the damage rating from?
Well, that is an easy question. Thank you, Mr. Kelly. The simple question to that is, well, from my opinion, is that you look at the environmental effects, which are on page 110 to 111, which talk about what actually happens, how you apply if somebody was running through a fire, for example, or how somebody was running through a blizzard or whatever. It gives a rating, and that's how much damage that they take whilst in that particular area. That would be the easy way to do it.
And that's if you're going with the, conjuring a terrain effect or something like that.
Yeah. That would be the easiest way.
The non-easy way is to use similar to an attack spell and have the results of your check actually play into a stronger fire or increase damage appropriately.
Yeah.
You can buff up the strength output by the number of advantages rolled or successes
or successes. Literally, look at the attack power, or look at the attack spell, and just use that as your model.
If only you could combine the spells. You know what I mean?
If only you could combine spells. It would just solve that problem.
It would.
Yeah.
If anyone wrote that talent, we should get them on as a guest.
I reckon
for our podcast.
Yeah.
Anyway. He sounds like a tool.
Very good. So, Chris, would you like to take us to the next question?
Yeah, Sproy923, great name, Sproy, posted this up on the FFG forums. He says, I would love a good discussion about breaking concentration. By the book, concentration could be broken by spending one threat since it's a maneuver. And from the text, the active character loses the benefit of a prior maneuver, such as from taking cover or assuming a guarded stance, until they perform the maneuver again. That doesn't seem quite right to me. It seems a bit too easy to lose concentration, which is why I would love to hear a discussion about it on the podcast.
We should just record our discussion we had before the podcast about this.
Yes, we did have a very elongated discussion about this.
Yeah.
All right, so where do we start? Michael, you've got your head around this a lot better than I have, I think.
By Raw, the rules is written, the GM could cancel the concentration of a spell. I know people at the table will disagree with me on that.
Yep.
I disagree on it myself. I find it a little bit too OP. And I think it's just a aftermath of the same threat table being copied from Star Wars and plugged straight into GeneSys without the consideration of magic on top of it. Because let's not forget, magic is an optional set of rules.
That is true.
So that's not something the design was initially intended for, of that one expenditure of that threat.
Yep.
So yes, by all means, the GM can do that. Yeah. However, a player is probably going to get sick of the GM doing that every time he tries to cast his spell. So we had a bit of discussion about it, all of us, and we sort of agreed if you really wanted to do that sort of thing with threat, maybe cost 2 or 3 threat to do it.
Yeah. 2 is probably a good place.
I like
3.
2.
Yeah. Depends how difficult you want it to be in your setting.
Yep.
And that's what it comes down to. Maybe it's a conversation you have, session 0, with your players. You know, how is this going to happen? Because the idea of breaking someone's concentration is something that comes up in all sorts of, fantasy settings, and it should have a place somewhere in the game. But as GM Mike has pointed out, this particular rule was not written, as far as we know, with magic in mind.
Because the other thing that I'd like to bring to the table here as well is that it doesn't actually talk about how many advantages that you could roll when you're attacking to break someone's concentration. And I guess for the way that I was looking at it is that you would treat it like a disarm skill.
Yep.
So when you go and disarm someone, so if you roll 3 advantages, you could knock the weapon out of somebody's hand. That's kind of the similar sort of process, I guess, when it comes to magic. And so I'd be looking at that or a triumph.
I liked GM Flano's suggestion by making it a talent. The talent related try and break someone's concentration.
Yep.
Now, that is important, not for the players, but for the GM. Could you imagine the big final boss fight with your overlord of your big villain who's summoning a demon from hell? And he has to concentrate for 3 rounds to do it. Someone fires an arrow at him, misses, but gets 3 advantages. That whole climatic scene ends when that concentration is broken on 3 measly threat. So there needs to be some weight behind it that would allow you to just break concentration willy-nilly. Because it can be quite a big impactful moment from players and the GM.
And it adds flavor to the character, and it gives, like, if they do pull this off on the last big fight, and disrupt the bad guy, that makes them feel badass.
Like for that talent, you could make it tiered. You could have tier 1 version of it, state you need 5 threat.
Or you can only do it on a triumph.
The
5 advantages, you mean?
5 advantages, or a triumph. The tier 2, it reduces that again. So when you get to tier 3, 4, or 5 with this talent, you're great at knocking away someone's concentration. And you could be a spellcaster who specializes purely in
taking out other spellcasters,
breaking concentration of other spellcasters.
Well, you can sort of already do that with Dispel.
True,
but I personally, if anyone plays World of Warcraft, I like the idea of the Blood Elf spell breakers, and how they disrupt magic and things like that.
Well, a very similar thing in another setting that's not magic but uses the same mechanics, like a null in Warhammer 40,000.
Absolutely.
They disrupt psychers around them everywhere they go. So that's perfect to put on that sort of character. Walks into a room where there's a cult chanting to summon this giant demon. He just walks in and says, "What's up?" And all of a sudden, all the psychic powers and manifestations come to a grinding stop because this guy who has this innate ability through the expenditure of advantages or triumphs just shuts down the concentration of all the psychers around him.
Chris,
I have another suggestion.
Sure.
So this is kind of an interesting one that I've seen in play. Another classic thing about fantasy magic in terms of those themes is when a spellcaster is concentrating and they suffer damage, they run the risk of losing their concentration.
Yep.
Instead of spending threat to break concentration, you know what else you can spend threat to do with magic? It's right there on the table.
Do wounds and strain. And at that point, all you really need to introduce is a small house rule that basically says when they suffer wounds for any reason, they need to make, a discipline check, reactively in order to maintain their concentration.
But I think the problem that this particular issue with the one threat coming from the combat encounters table is when you're doing a check after you've cast the spell.
Yeah.
That's not a magic skill.
Yeah.
But that's true. That's true. And I don't think that suggestion solves his problem, because his problem is when I, the caster, roll threat.
Exactly.
Can the GM spend it? I agree with Hooly. I look at disarm as a good counter, and so if you say 3 advantage, well, maybe 3 threat, but we all know magic is a lot riskier, so I pump it down to 2 threat. I'm in agreement with you guys. Yeah. I think the GM could spend maybe 2 threat to break the concentration if it's threat originated by the caster. But again, DBAD.
Yeah. Don't do it all the time, otherwise your players are going to get sick of you. You want to vary it up. If it makes sense narratively that something's happened that, suddenly your concentration's broken, sure. But don't abuse it.
Does it look good on film?
I love that. Yeah, absolutely. So hopefully that has answered the question. Again, there are so many different ways that you can do all of the different things that no one player is right. It's whatever's going to be right at your table is the main.
Actually, can I throw one more idea at you?
Sure.
This is similar to what Chris just suggested with inflicting wounds and etc. Yep. Perhaps keep it as that one threat. Rules is written if you really want to stay that way. When that applies to a magic user who is concentrating, the GM says, "Well, this one threat's going to break your concentration unless you spend 2 strain or suffer 2 strain." And the player's like, "Oh, I'm on threshold, so I guess I'll stop the concentration check and let you cancel it."
Yeah,
otherwise,
that's really
good.
That's a good one.
That was a really good suggestion.
Good job.
Really good.
See, and you reckon that you were the person who had the least experience with magic. Good suggestion. Very good. All right, so we've got time for one last question, I think. So our good friend Ricky Buxton on Facebook asks, how would you go about adjudicating a spell that used an additional effect without wanting the base spell effect? For example, immobilizing or knocking down someone without causing any damage through attack, or pulling a weapon out of someone's hand. Thoughts, gentlemen?
My first thought, and I've expressed this, tough luck. If it's in combat, you need to use the base effect.
Sure.
Part of that is it's setting the difficulty.
Right.
So if we're reducing that, we can get off script and make some powerful things happen without taking into consideration the proper difficulties. But, and there's a big but.
And there is a big but. That we always say, never say no.
Yes.
Always say yes, but. So
yeah, I like and you and I talked about this before the show, but I'm in fundamental disagreement with that, because the spell action types, and this is called out in the core rulebook, are not the end all be all. The rules say these are suggestions of common spell types. Okay, so there is nothing stopping you from basically creating what Ricky's describing is basically a narrative use of a spell type just in combat. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. But at that point, you just, you don't get the base effect. The GM has to just figure out what the difficulty is. But then you can use the additional effects tables and the base spell effect difficulty to better quickly come to what that difficulty should be for that effect. For something like Gust of Wind that will knock someone prone without dealing damage to them.
I don't think we're in fundamental disagreement at all there, because my particular point is that the difficulty is what we're trying to keep. you don't necessarily have to do the base effects, as long as you're making sure that you're sticking to the sort of difficulty to achieve those effects.
That's right.
No. We are in fundamental disagreement. Yes. No. Yeah. You're spot on. You're spot on. This happened in Harry Potter all the time.
Right.
All the time. I mean, this happens so much. And my basic rule of thumb there was that I would look at the actual spell effect and the base spell difficulty, and I would determine what that difficulty was if they wanted the base effect, and then I would just scratch one off of it. That was my rule of thumb. Sometimes it might go a little lower, but that was my starting rule of thumb, and it worked pretty well.
I think that the one thing that I think we'll get into this when we do an episode on dealing with difficulty. But one of the things...
It's going to be a difficult topic, though.
Oh, my goodness. See what I've got to put up with, Chris?
It's very formidable.
So what I think that some people are worried about, especially when it comes to spells, is that when you've designed a spell... As soon as somebody sort of says, I want to do this, and then you've set a difficulty, you've effectively set the precedent. So that player then writes that down and go, right, well, remember back in session 212 when I, played that particular action and this is what the difficulty is. Is that a bad thing? I would like to say that it's not, because your player is taking an invested interest in writing that down as something cool that his character did.
It's not a bad thing, but it's not a bad thing if you have utilized the excellent suggestions on this particular podcast and established during session 0 that any of those decisions can be rewritten at a later time in order to preserve game balance.
Yeah.
Because what players have to factor in is the GM has a billion things going on managing the game, and when someone asks for an on-the-fly decision, that's not necessarily them at their best making the best judgment call. They quickly come up with something to move the session along. And if you hold that against them 10 sessions later, they're probably not going to be that lenient again in the future.
Yep.
So it's GMing and playing, it's a game of give and take.
Yeah.
Really
when you look at all of these rules as they are, GeneSys, for example, it's been play tested for 5 years before it even hit the books because of all the Star Wars stuff that's happened before it. And a lot of stuff has been drawn from that. Those talents that are written, as another example, they are talents that people have spent weeks going through, reading, playtesting, and whatever else. You can't be expected, as you just said, you can't be expected to, as a GM, I think, to make an official ruling that could have ramifications down the track. Just something to keep in mind, I think, as part of, as you said, Chris, as part of that discussion at the start, is that decisions that get made on the fly aren't always going to be, solidified in stone, I guess. So there you go. That's 2 hours worth of discussion on Magic.
And all million questions we're going to get through.
Okay, so there were quite a few more. But, we do have behind the screens that no doubt some of these questions will come up. And yes, we promise that we will attempt to get to as many of those questions in the future and have those discussions about that. And there are a lot to be had. So very good discussion, guys. I think that between the two episodes, I think everyone who picks up GeneSys to play is going to have a much better idea as to how to handle Magic in their setting.
Well, I think we had quite a large break between episodes, obviously, this one and the previous Magic episode. And I've heard from several different sources that the last episode is quite informative for them. I know for me, going into Magic prior to that last recording we did, I was like, I don't really get it. But after that recording, I got it.
Yeah.
I fell in love with Magic, and now I'm pretty familiar with it.
Yep.
So I hope that has carried out to everyone else out there.
Indeed.
Not just me. But if it's just me, that's fine. I'm happy with that.
But thank you, Chris, for coming on the show as well. And sort of because you've obviously got a lot of experience with regards to Magic, with the playtesting that you've done, the settings that you've written, that your knowledge was invaluable.
I would say it was magical.
Magical, yes, yes.
It's my pleasure, guys. Thanks for letting me invade your show.
Yes, because I've invaded yours enough.
Damn, Skippy.
We'll have to get some of these other people onto the show as well. So I think
we need to do one more. We need to let me run a live play for you guys.
How about we do it with the familiar setting? Because it's unfamiliar to me.
I would like to get familiar with it.
Yes, indeed. So we could do that as a live play.
Totally
I think.
down.
We could totally bond.
Totally down for some familiar actual play on the dice pool.
Very good. Because our next episode will be the last. Actually, it might even come out around about the same time. No. I should finish my sentences.
Keep us updated.
This is the first time here.
The last episode of the Knight's Edge game. We've still got one last episode to go because when I was in the middle of editing it, I just sat down to edit it, and that's when my the mixer decided to go boom.
Yes.
Which was that sort of unfortunately put it behind schedule, so I couldn't do bits and pieces. So hopefully that will get up after this episode has aired, but you'll get to see the exciting conclusion. Which includes our missing member, poor old Caitlin with her exploding computer. It's all about explosions with us.
Yeah, despairs.
We don't look at them, though.
No,
we
never.
don't. No, we don't look at them. What?
Cool guys, don't look at explosions.
You walk away from the explosions with the wind blowing your hair and a pair of sunglasses on as the explosion erupts behind you, and you end up looking like a total badass. And if John Woo is directing, there will be doves.
Very good. So, so sorry if people were listening and hoping to hear Caitlin's dulcet tones, but she will be back in the next episode.
I believe, yeah.
The next chatting episode where, we'll bring her back into the fold. But we miss you, Kat. So hopefully you'll listen to the episode and go, I wish I was there, because she pretty much, that's what she said.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, if you have any questions, like the ones that we've just answered, send us an email to info@thedicepoolpodcast.com, or you can post your questions to Facebook and Twitter. There are plenty of great community members who will offer you some great advice, including ourselves, because we've got some great fans out there who've obviously getting a lot of experience with some of the systems, or some of the settings, that they've developed for GeneSys. And just in this short amount of time, people are obviously really eager to develop some. And there's some great ones that Huzz that you found the other day.
The Arkham Horror inspired book, 500 pages.
Oh, holy dooly!
And I opened that PDF and I thought my PDF reader was having a fit. And I've gone, no, this can't be 500 pages. And look at the index.
Yeah.
Sure enough, 500 pages.
Wow.
Couldn't believe it.
Which is amazing. Yeah.
It's intense.
The artwork is sensational too. I mean, he's done an amazing job.
The layout in that book is just phenomenal, and I think it's something we should look at in the future, because it sort of came out in that period of time where all of us weren't doing recordings because of explosions. So getting into that, because I do enjoy a bit of a horror RPG, so I'd love to dive deep into that. And I plan to look into it for inspiration of how to deal with horror and insanity for the Dark Heresy campaign.
Yeah, absolutely. Very good.
Yes.
All right. So, take a look at that. And you can also visit us on the website at www.thedicepoolpodcast.com.
Also, make sure to like and follow the Dicepool Podcast on Facebook and Twitter by searching @Dicepool Podcast. We also have our amazing community group that is starting to get filled with all your activities and work, which is great to see.
And also, you can find us on YouTube, believe it or not. We have no videos.
I believe it.
Well, okay. Believe what you will. We haven't got any videos as such, but there is recordings of our recordings.
Yeah.
So you can listen to us on YouTube if that's somewhere you prefer to do your viewing of things. Just look for us. Just search Dice Pool Podcast and you'll find us no problems at all.
Very good. Well, again, thank you, Chris, for joining us this episode, and thank you to Huzz and Martin for also being here on this Sunday afternoon.
It was good to get back in the recording studio.
Absolutely.
Very good. So, yes, thanks again, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
It's been a pleasure, guys.
Very good.
Enjoy your European adventure.
European vacation?
Yes, I was hoping for that.
Yeah, if only.
Hilarity will ensue.
You just need Chevy Chase, that's all. But anyway. All right, so...
Did you say GeneSys setting?
Oh, my...
You totally could.
I don't know whether I can do that. Although there is comedy in the rule book, so yeah, that's another episode. But anyway, all right. So I think that's a wrap. I'm GM Hooly.
I am GM Huzz.
I'm GM Flano.
I'm GM.
And I'm GM Chris. And I'm GM Chris. Wishing you peace, love, and good gaming.
And together we are the Dice Pool Podcast, where adventure is just a roll away. The Dice Pool Podcast is a proud member of the D20 Radio Network. For more information about the network, visit www.d20radio.com. The Dice Pool Podcast is a fan-generated podcast. All of the information provided on the podcast and related website are not affiliated with Fantasy Flight Games or any of their licensors. The content of this podcast remains a property of the Dice Pool Podcast and is intended for educational and informational purposes only. The GeneSys Role Playing Game, the GeneSys logo, content, and all material remain the property of Fantasy Flight Games.